If you've ever thought you wondered what a Canadian sounds like, you're about to find out, because this is going to be a whole bunch of Canadians talking about one of the most Canadian shows you've ever seen, Letterkenny. If you haven't watched Letterkenny, you can check it out. It's on Hulu, Crave, it's on a bunch of other places, I'm sure. Hilarious show in the idea of growing up in a small Canadian town. Get lots of hockey references, lots of cool stuff talking about farming, and we wonder why people think that Canadians do nothing but play hockey and talk about farming. This is the team from the produce stand, and they are running a podcast that you got to listen to. Let's jump in right now. What's up, crew? This is one of the fun ones where I have a bunch of people on the show today. You get to experience all of the greatness, well, minus one of the greatness. Actually, we had one person who was a host that couldn't make it. But this is the team from the Produce Stand podcast. Or is it Produce Stand? I don't know. Either way, I'm going to say the Produce Stand. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Al. This team features Al Grego, Tanya Grego, and the one and only Squirrely Matt. This is a fun conversation where we talk about the origin of the Produce Stand podcast, the idea that being a sort of reaction show and a discussion show around something like Letterkenny turned into now this really, really great multi-season, deeply engaging community. And then on top of that, how they took these practices, where they came from personally, some of the technology that goes into it, just the fun of it. If you are not excited about podcasting and listening to great shows like The Produce Stand after this, you have no soul. That's all I gotta say. You literally have no soul if you don't enjoy this. So check it out. Oh, by the way, speaking of check it out, if you want to make sure and you want to support great shows like this, we're pushing to get The Produce Stand on YouTube, because they need to be there. You can do me a favor. Click on the like button and also just subscribe, hit the bell icon, do the things, write a comment, love the Produce Stand. Need to see more great stuff like this on the channel. Or write whatever you want. I shouldn't tell you what to write. That would be kind of weird. But this is a great conversation. I want to give a huge thanks to all the team. And we could not get Victor, who was the last of the microphones, but check out the Produce Stand. All the links are down below. With that, let's get into this fantastic multi-person, multi-part conversation right now.
Hi, my name is Tanya, and we're here today with Al and Squirrely Matt from the Produce Stand, and we're on DiscoPosse podcast.
This is the fun part, because when you get to have professional podcasters on a podcast, I get to just walk away. Like, I'm done. You folks can run with it. Thank you all for being on this side of the mic. This is weird too. I just realized the last time we chatted, of course, I was a guest on your podcast, and thank you very much for that. And you are all part of something really, really cool. And if it's new to people here, I hope they obviously check out the podcast. They check out the show the podcast talks about, but you're much more than that. And so I'm going to, because it's a bunch of you, I got to go around robin here. Now, the good part is we're all going to sound as Canadian as possible, which is hilarious. People never know that I'm Canadian until I talk to another Canadian. And then for whatever reason, our accents kind of bleed pretty heavily in those ones. I've been watching some of the Ottawa trucker protests, and I think that I sound Canadian until I watch a live stream from Ottawa, and I'm like, oh, now I know why people think Canadians sound funny.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Can't hide it there.
Those Canadians in particular, but we won't go there tonight.
It's a different breed altogether. So, all right, I will go in order of importance. Tanya, you're up first.
Oh, you should know by now, I don't like going first on our podcast.
That's exactly why I shoved you up front.
Fantastic.
He's been paying attention.
So
All
if
right.
you want to do a quick bio and tell folks what brought you to the produce stand.
All right. My bio. Oh gosh. We're not doing weight, height, and measurements. So what brought me to the produce stand was, of course, Al, my husband. He watched it and was just you watched the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would get snippets of it here and there when I was coming into the room and the kids were down for the night and I was coming to sit and watch a show with him. And he's like, "Oh, this show is great. This show is great." And he tried to force me to watch a couple of them. And I just thought it was the stupidest show I've ever seen in my life. And none of it made sense. None of it I liked. It wasn't my kind of thing. Um, it's an acquirement that I have grown to appreciate and like, and in some cases love. But yeah, he then came to me and said, "I have an idea." This was during COVID. Let's. I want to do a podcast, and I want you on it. And I think my jaw dropped, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, where, what, why do you want me involved in this? I don't like the show. Like, you're not going to make me like the show." And he's like, "No, no, here's my plan. Here's my idea. I'm going to have Matt. I'm going to have Victor and you. And we're because you all have different outlooks on the show and it will make for interesting podcasts." So it's his brainchild. And I just kind of tagged along and there was nothing else to do. It was COVID. So I'm like, hey, why not? And it was actually the best thing for me and for us. I think the whole team has all said that this is just one of those steps out of life and a moment to just sit back and laugh and share and enjoy something that is not anything to do with anything going on in the world today. And yeah, that's kind of my thing.
We definitely need that. And yeah, it's been great. And it's funny, like you said, the mix of voices and styles and opinions is what makes it good. And Al, of course, since you're next on Mike, I'll pick on you as the next bio deliverer.
Sure. I'm Al Grego, and I am the producer and host of the Produce and podcast. And I mean, yeah, it's a pandemic project, as many projects started in the pandemic were. But I've always wanted to do a podcast since I knew what podcasts were. I've been listening to podcasts since probably 2003, 2005. I can't remember now. And my first exposure to kind of a after show type podcast, which is what we do, was the Lost Jay and Dan podcast, and I really loved it because this is a show that I really enjoyed watching. And then I was starved for more content in between episodes, so I'd look online for anything I could, and I found this thing called the podcast, and I listened to it, and it's all people who have the same interests as me talking about a show that I loved, and so that's what we're doing with the Produce Stand. Um, and yeah, Tanya's right. It's a little bit selfishly, I asked her to be on just because I knew this was going to take up some of my time, and if she was involved, she couldn't complain about it. But also,
we joked about that yesterday.
Yeah, it's also it's a great show, and I know superficially it looks like dumb humor, but there's actually a lot of like heart, but a lot of smartness behind the dumb jokes, and it's a very accessible, it's a very progressive show, despite on the surface what it looks like. And I wanted to get the word out, and I looked it up, and I saw what other podcasts are out there that talk about Letterkenny. And one of the bigger ones is a bunch, Dean and Tiara down in Seattle, who we're going to have on tonight. They're our biggest competitor, but they're also our closest allies. They've been doing it a lot longer than us. But in terms of a Canadian view for this show, there was another one based in Toronto, but he just didn't, he stopped doing it after a while. I don't know why. I've reached out and I haven't been able to contact him. So it was like, yeah, it's a Canadian podcast about a Canadian show, and we're here to kind of translate all the Canadianisms on the show to those who want to watch and listen. And we have so many viewers from all over the world, and we've got an amazing community that we've built, and it's been our recipe from all the craziness that's been going on. So yeah.
And that leads the perfect final intro to what makes up the reason why you call yourself Squirrely, Matt. Definitely a good show reference. But we should also know that we are missing Victor, who could not make it to the broadcast today, but also another great voice on the show. But Matt, you're up.
Yeah, thanks for having us. So yeah, Matt Belanger, aka Squirrely Matt. I'll pull one of our buddy Demond there. Father of three, hubby of one, as he starts his off, and yeah, it's been a blast. To go back to the initial thing, how we got into it, it's same idea. This was definitely, I joke, love child out of COVID boredom. I know Al and I have known each other for years through work. We've played around with some podcasting through work and other things. I have a bit of a media background. That was sort of where I started. My career didn't follow that path. Priorities change, some interests change, but I originally had some aspirations to be involved in film and television in some degree. So even though that's not directly what this is, the media world and anything connected to it and around it has always been a real passion, interest of mine in the background. So yeah, like Tanya said, when COVID kicked off, and then Al reached out to me one day and said, "Hey, do you want to be in a podcast with me, or do you want to come to a podcast?" I didn't even ask him what it was about. I just said, "Sure." And then I said, "Well, what are we doing it on?" And then he said, "Letterkenny," and I laughed. I'm like, "Oh, really? Okay, all right, let's do it." And I was really excited because I don't know if you mentioned it, but I think I was the one who got you into Letterkenny originally. It was definitely a show I was aware of, I watched, I was a fan of, and then I got Al onto it, and he got hooked, and I think he's become the super fan of our group. But that's okay. We all love it, and it just took off from there. And I think we were all very surprised and kind of thrown back a bit by what it's become, and that's
Mm.
been the real thing about it. I know COVID hit people, a lot of people, very differently. I know early on, I joked, but it was truth. I didn't step inside another building outside of my own house for over 100 days. Like I'm talking grocery stores, like you name it. My wife did everything early days of just general concern. So we dedicated one person. So it was a very strange time, and it still is. But this definitely very quickly became that weekly escape where we could just put everything aside, come together with friends, laugh, argue, debate, have some fun, and regardless of what happened, it was just we've had nothing but a blast, and now we're trying to figure out how to keep it going because we've caught up to the series. But it's been a blast, and I'm very thankful for what Al has led us through, and what we've created as a group, and now where we are here.
Well, if you talk about the fan base too, you talk, it's in, you've got like sort of competitors in the marketplace. And I think of the days of like message boards for talk radio groups, and there'd be like Ron and Fez and Opie and Anthony and all these like big talk. The talk radio was huge. Of course, we didn't have much. We had Humble and Fred, in Toronto, and they've moved around a bit. You would have like someone and someone. It was always like a goofy duo. Maybe they had a third person on who would, be a bonus voice, the stunt boy or whatever it was going to be.
Mm.
And then you would get these message boards, because that was sort of the way that people communicated outside of the show. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have these other ways to chat. So we would people would go on these message boards, and then you'd get 3 message boards, and they'd be sort of like warring for who was the top message board for whatever radio duo was. And it was hilarious because that was this fun competition, but obviously you're all fans. So you're not really competing. You're in this, really, you believe in a common purpose, and it's a fun community way to do it. But now podcasting changed this, that you can be broadcasting, you can get your voice out there. Their limitations for access to this stuff is so good, right? It's so much lower. And production quality, I mean, you folks do a really, really great job with production. As a guy that does zero post-production, like I will record this, I will cut off the front and the back, and I will push it to air. Like, it doesn't get much treatment. I got a huge respect for the amount of work that you do, as a group. I don't know who wants to raise their hand. I imagine, Al, you're probably as the technician behind a lot of the stuff, because I know you've got a real talent for that. But
yeah, a bit of background in audio engineering. Obviously, it's what I went to college for. And so, I mean, podcasting is a marriage of my love of radio, which I was a big fan of radio growing up, and my audio engineering background, and yeah, just wanting to create content. And knowing that I have a face for radio, but radio doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Podcasting is just so much more accessible for sure. I mean, I credit, I come from a corporate training background. That's for 20 years. That's how I made my living, working for various companies. Um, and But just recently in my latest role, I started, well, not in, sorry, in my latest company, I started using podcasting as a training tool. Um, and so that's where I kind of started doing that and having some fun with it. And I credit actually Toronto Mike, who's a big time podcaster in the Toronto area. I call him the Canadian version of Mark Maron. And actually today he just released his 1000th episode. So
Wow.
kudos to him. He invited me into his house and he showed me his setup in his studio, and we had some great chats, and he didn't charge me for it. He was just, yeah, come on over, because he knew I was a listener and a fan, and we had a great time. And from that knowledge, I went back to my office and I bought the equipment. I started podcasting, and that got the right amount of attention, so that when my company decided, and I'll mention the company name, Moneris, decided that they wanted to start a podcasting strategy of their own, um, I'm the one they tapped. So I went from training to marketing in the company, and I've never been in marketing before, but they saw me as, kind of the resident expert, and that's where, so now I make a living. Like, the produce stand's a passion project. I make no money doing that, but now I'm making my living as a podcaster, which is amazing. I love it.
Mhm,
Like 5 years ago,
That's
that
so
would
cool.
have been unheard of.
Now, Matt, you mentioned you had early aspirations for TV and
Mhm.
broadcast stuff. What was your exposure to it, and then what was the diversion that took you out of that game?
Yeah, so I originally went to school, Loyalist College out in Belleville, Ontario, for television and new media production. So I was on the full production side, learning how to use a camera, edit, graphics, direct, you name it, for production. Very much enjoyed it. I will also say I was in my much younger years at the time and not so focused. So that definitely didn't help. And then when I came out of it, I had a couple co-ops and internships, and one of them which was actually up in Barrie at the A channel at the time, which I believe is now CTV North or something like that. And it was also the time during the for Canadian folks that know Bell Globe Media buyout. So Chum Media at the time got bought out by Bell Globe Media, and the industry was kind of in a weird spot where there was a lot of hiring. I think it was more firing as they were sort of dismantling and rearranging that. And that was the time I was trying to find a job. So it made it very difficult. So I thought I had this great in, and then they pretty much put a freeze on at the station, and that kind of derailed a little bit. And just it's one of those industries. If you don't stay close to it, you quickly get far from it, right? It doesn't take much. It's like, buying a new computer. By the time you buy and take it home, then the better one's already on the shelf, right? Same idea with this industry. Is you start stepping away from it, the longer you're gone, the more difficult it is to get back. And then there was some things on the personal side. With my family, we kind of had some movement around, and I had to find a different gig just to keep myself going. And again, stepped aside and side. And before I knew it, it was kind of felt too far. And then priorities changed. I had my oldest son a couple of years after that, and at that point, it's like I just need to keep my head above water, and it just seemed like a distant dream at the time. That said, as the years have gone on, and I thank Al for a lot of it too, the work we've done in our company. I've worked in fraud, I've worked in a number of other things, nothing to do with media, but through his work and some of the cross stuff that we do, he had the opportunity to dabble with podcasting, dabble with internal videos for training materials, and he was nice enough to invite me in, knowing I had a bit of a passion for that in a former life. So he and I worked closely to set up, the green room and things of that. Not the green room, like the green screen space, and do some lighting and play around. So he's kept me close to that taste of that kind of life, and it's been fun to play around with that. So when this came up to do podcasting, again, I've never had a ton of experience with podcasting, but I knew what it was, right? I've always liked radio as well. But I'm like, I'm in. This is just going to be fun. and it's really paid off as something that's kept that flavor going. I'm also that nerd for film and television. Like, I know when I drive around, if I see a bunch of pylons on a road that say, I think some of them say like actually I think they say TPS or something like that. I'm like, that's a film production.
Yeah.
I'll often slow down, or I'll sneak in, well, what's going on here? I'm so just, I get this weird excitement when I get near productions, and I just want to know what's going on. And I know I won't be a part of it, but it's great. And we're in Toronto North, or Toronto, which is Hollywood North, right? So there's productions all the time. Even my neighbor, he's in a film crew and working on Titans and a number of other things. So I get to talk to him and banter about the industry a bit. And so that's good enough for me and my point of life. But it's, yeah, that's kind of what the diversion was. Priority changes. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. And I think what's great about it, though, like, look, 20 years back, 10 years back, even when we think of the industry, like film, radio, like, you couldn't just, like, you would get a job as an intern, and that was like a magical thing, right? You would be just getting exposure, right? And the magical feeling of like, wow, at least I'm in here. Like, you'd get a pittance of a salary for the pleasure of doing coffee runs and grabbing production pieces and doing crazy, after hours editing, whatever it's going to be to make that 2-hour show amazing. You get near zero credit for it. If you're lucky, you get a little bit of credit for it. You never get mic time. You never get camera time. It was a very sort of like, there's a lot of machine wrapped around it.
Yeah.
And they was like, you got to do your time, kid. You got to earn your keep. Then you eventually get up. If you're lucky, you audition. Maybe you get an overnight show. It was a battle to get in.
Yeah.
Now you're absolutely. Like, nothing, and fuck it. I got a SM7B and I got an internet connection. I run a radio station now.
Yeah, it's awesome. And the other big thing, I think a lot of it, looking back, I mean, my own growth and self-awareness is confidence, right? Like, I look at younger version of Matt doing even this seems a stretch. I always had sort of my personality, but I had a real confidence issue when I was younger. So trying to step outside my comfort zone and put myself out there in a place of vulnerability was very challenging. So I didn't do it. Right now I could give two fucks. I'm like, I'm going to do what I want. I don't mind putting myself on the line, even in my line of work, even though it's not related to this. I talk to people all levels of the organization. I have no problem sort of calling out what's what, because I've seen success. I felt what it feels like to be vulnerable and then see the outcomes of it and how it can be successful. And it's not something that you should shy away from, right? But when you're young, you don't know that. You're kind of forced into the system, and find an education, know what you want to do, and no one really does. Some people do, and I wish I had that, but a lot of people don't. And you kind of go through this whirlwind of trying to sort yourself out. And in all reality, it's not till about your 30s that you figure even half of yourself out. And then I've also at that time supposed to have had it all put together. So it's challenging for sure. And but again, it is what it is, and I'm very happy now with what's going on.
Well, it's funny you mentioned too new media, because I remember that's kind of what it was called. And Al, right at the time when you were going to school and you were at Trebas, and like we had other folks who we knew, Travis Watts, good friend of ours who we were also in a band together with. Yeah, we had a bunch of folks, and they would get jobs in this like new media, which meant basically you were doing, Dreamweaver and like funky early stage 3D animation and
CD-ROM authoring.
Macromedia, like just like Macromedia was a product, like a company that was worth investing in back in the day. Right now it's just gone. But it was almost the same thing, that it became this elite, you were just happy to be beside it kind of experience. And now it's so just democratized and accessible. It's fantastic because those limitations are gone. And I think, like, kind of to what you're saying, Matt, like 20-year-old me, while being in a different mindset, because if I ever said, if 20-year-old me met 49-year-old me and I said I'm coming from a place of vulnerability, I'd have punched me in the ear, right? Like, because I just would have never thought I would ever think like this. But it's like, this is the truth. But 20-year-old me would be more confident, I think, because of the accessibility of platforms and software and capability. Like, there's no less of a barrier now, other than your personal sort of choice to grind it out.
Yeah, less of a barrier, but more of an overwhelming option, if that makes sense. Like there's a lot more out there, but you're right. You can get at anything you need to.
That young confidence, though, came more from kind of ignorance and not knowing any better. Not so much about, because when I was at that age, I wouldn't know where to start. I would just start and then hope to work it out. But
I'm still doing that. What are you talking about? That's just my approach to life.
The beauty of what I took at Trebas, the multimedia, is it kind of let me dabble in everything: video, web, graphics, audio, and that's suited me just fine now. And because now I look at any kind of job in marketing or in any kind of creative work or content creation, you need to know all those things. Also, but I mean, the tools are such, though, that you don't need to have the same kind of level of knowledge that I had growing up, because now a lot of it is pretty WYSIWYG and pretty, easy to do, point and click and push a button, apply a filter, and you're done. But still, having that kind of foundation, and also that well-rounded knowledge of the different media, video, audio, graphic art and stuff. I'm not a graphic artist, but I know good graphic art when I see it, so I know who to go to when when I need a poster made, right? So yeah, that's really served me well, and I think that really prepared me for what the world that is now.
Well, and I guess for the folks that get to watch this on video, if you're listening on audio, head on over to the YouTube channel. You can check this out. Speaking of posters, you have a plethora of really cool posters behind you, Al. And I know, of course, these are the Royal Pains posters. So you talk about the Royal Pains and give a little brief history on what the posters are from.
Well, I was a weekend rock star before everything shut down, and I was blessed to not only have a great band, but my guitarist was an insanely talented graphic artist who, when we first started playing, he's like, "Hey, do you want me to design some posters?" I'm like, we're all like, "Yeah, that'd be great," because we knew how, like, the kind of art he did. And then he said, we can just kind of reuse them for every show. He's like, no, I was going to make a poster for each show. So I'm like, really? And he did. And so, I mean, what I have on my wall here are just some samples. We played over 120 or so shows. We have a poster for every single one, and they're all equally amazing. And so, yeah, again, we were blessed with talented musicians, but also talented, artists in our band. Sadly, the band is no more. We can thank COVID for that. But we'll continue.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, continue rocking on, and hopefully one day I'll be back on stage again. But until then, we've got the memories.
Well, and you and I shared a stage a couple of times ourselves as well back in the day. So that was.
Let's do Poise for the Worm. Yes.
Yeah, that was. Still your Twitter handle too, PFTW, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, you know what it is. I mean, Gmail finally came and took away my Hotmail, or else I'd still have my Hotmail too. Because once you have that online persona, it's kind of hard to switch, right? So Poise for the Worm, that was, my persona from 20 years ago, and I just kept it because it was just easier to do that than find something else.
You're talking to a guy that's known around the world as DiscoPosse, so I get you.
Just owning it at this point.
I went to a tech conference in Paris, and this was the hilarious thing. So it's like a bunch of people showed up, and of course they're common community. So in the tech community, we're basically like carnies. We just go from town to town, and it's a different town, but it's the same goofy assholes in the tent every time. So we just go, and we would have a show, and I was speaking at one of the events. And there's a guy who I've always been keen on chatting with, and we knew each other on Twitter, right? That was kind of how we communicated. And so this guy, Randy Bias, he's, if you're into cloud computing, he's the guy that coined the phrase pets versus cattle, if you ever hear that phrase. So he's the one that was the originator, we believe, of that phrase. Anyways, Randy's a great guy, really wild personality, interesting character. And I'm just walking across this random sort of place in Paris, and all I hear is DiscoPosse yelled across. And I look, I'm like, what's going on? And I look, and there's Randy Bias, finally for the first time meeting in person. And like, he wouldn't, you don't call him, yell Eric, like that's,
Right.
it'd be a bunch of them probably. So
Yeah.
DiscoPosse, there is only one. I'm a safe bet there.
Yeah. It's funny when you have the online world kind of mix worlds and you meet people in person for the first time. I remember Toronto Mike had one of his listener experiences where a bunch of listeners came together in person to meet each other, and we all had to have name tags with our online personas on the name tag, not our
with your
real
board name, right?
Yeah, because no one knew, my name was Al. They knew I was PFTW or Royal Pain or whatever, right? It's just hilarious. So we all had name tags with like nonsense, at names on them or whatever.
That's
right?
awesome. That's awesome.
Well, I remember the first time of even seeing like cereal boxes when they wrote the Twitter handle on it for the company name. And I remembered thinking, like, I think this is when it's going to take off. I was already on Twitter and you started to see it being talked about, and news channels would have it in the Chiron, and there'd be more presence of that stuff. And then it became that. And then the funny thing was choosing your identity, especially if you're associated with a brand. Like, imagine that you were brand new to it then, it'd be like at Moneris Al, right? Like
Right.
that's what people would often do, is they'd put their company in there. And I was lucky enough that my presence was so separated from everything that I did that it never conflicted. So I would go and people would just know where I work, but I didn't have to tag it along. And it's funny that there was a time when you had to choose MySpace,
Right.
Twitter, like all these things, and where do you put your effort to grinding up your audience?
Yeah. Yeah. I've gone through a couple handles all in. I know when in my early ICQ days and MSN days, it was Dopey XTC. I have no idea how that came to be, but
Not
that's
a
what it
far
was.
cry from Squirrely Matt, then, is
My
what
God, not a far cry, yeah. And at some point I realized I don't think that's gonna work going forward. And then I landed on Dude North, and I don't remember how it happened, but one day that came to my head, and I laughed, and I'm like, because I was very much especially I kid you not, in high school, even when I was still Dopey XTC, I almost only wore things that had a Canada flag on it. Like I was one of those weird, hardcore Canadian patriot guys. Like I had 17 different T-shirts with different slogans, and it was obsessive at one point. It was kind of weird, but anyways, and then so when Dude North came into my head, it made me laugh because I'm like, I'm the dude from the North, right? And it just stuck from there, and I've really held on to that one. So even when I didn't even use Twitter in the early days, I went and set up, at the Dude North on Twitter. And then I just kind of left it just in case. Yeah, just in case I started to use it more. And I've held on to it since because I've just really enjoyed that name. And as long as I'll be able to keep it, it's going to keep going, right?
That's a solid brand, though. It's a good call.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah.
Who the fuck knows what PFTW is? But
I'll be honest, I've known you a long time. I think that's the first time I've heard what it actually means.
Well, I guess Pink Floyd The Wall. Yeah, no. There's no.
Now, Tanya, you're the interesting one of the bunch because you have a zero online presence. You're such a you're.
Oh no, not zero. She can explain that in a minute.
So hold on before you start grilling her. So we have a great community, Eric, because you're part of that group. They're dying. They're begging for Tanya to join the group, and she has joined the group because I made her join, but she won't go on. She won't go on and interact. She's like allergic to networking, which is hilarious. Well,
we're gonna find out after the fact that she's probably been there the whole time. It was some other thing. It's probably like Dude West. It's actually her. Yeah.
Babe West. Yeah.
No, I'm so much like Wayne. It's not even funny. From the show, like I'm a person to person, like phone me. Like Matt and Matt tried sending me a bunch of messages, and I think after the fifth messages, I'm like, screw this, call. I'm like, what's going on? What do you need? I'm like, I never can, like, at work, I have 1,000 emails a week, and it's just so overwhelming on the computer all the time. And I've never been interested in the tech world. I would rather see somebody and sit with them and talk to them than look at Facebook pictures of what is going on in their life. Like I've not ever connected to people that way.
she doesn't follow is what she
I
means.
don't follow.
Just like
Well, and
It's
plus,
like living the whole thing of living your best timeline. You know what's better about living your best timeline? Actually fucking living your best timeline, like living
Yeah.
it, not living it through the camera.
Yeah.
yeah, like I think when the whole wave of cell phones and like I'm gonna sound real old, but that's how old I am. But when the wave came through and I disconnected for 3 years. I was home when we had our daughter. I was home with her, and there's just not a whole lot of time. Like, there's so many things that need to get done in a day, and I just never found the energy or the time to get on and connect with people that way. I was just picking up the phone and calling people.
you also have a bit of an addictive personality.
I do have an
So
addictive.
what
personality.
happens when she does get hooked onto something is she spends way too much time
I
on it.
can be very obsessive. So.
She's in it to win it at that point.
Yeah. So
If you're a fan of Fred Flintstone, you'll know that reference. But I'm on the oldest of the bunch, so I'm the only one here who will understand that. Maybe a handful of listeners, but yeah, see, like you see people at concerts, and it's like the same as if I was doing this podcast and I was doing this the whole time.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's better. Like I used to like yell at people. I'm like, you know, the show's there, right? Like not up there.
Yeah.
Like you're watching it through a 3-inch screen. I don't care if it's bloody Nickelback. Watch the fucking show. Like, you've got eyes. You're going to remember this. You're never going to watch it. It's like a wedding video. No one goes back to watch it.
Yeah. It's true. Like I definitely don't hold up the whole time, but I go to concerts. I often will take a moment, catch a couple moments. But even recently, I went back through my phone, need to clean up some space, and I think every single concert video, especially, I deleted. I'm like, that was cool, but watching it back, I'm like, it doesn't take you there like you thought it would. It's a memory, but the memory is the better part, and you just want to hold on to that. And
you just want to go on. If you want to see footage again, just go to YouTube and watch the professionally shot.
Yeah, it's all there.
Yeah. Or one of the 1,200 other idiots who've got their phone in their hand, right? Like it's going to be out there. It used to be I could understand at one point where it was a rarity to be the camera, right? And to have the online presence and to build an audience. And so I'm going to bite myself by the fact that I'm answering the question of why people do it, right? Because they want to be creators, they want to have something, but it's more like I'm with you, Matt. This idea that like capture a snippet, maybe post it up on Twitter or whatever, but then that's it. Like enjoy the rest of the experience. It would be like having your kids, is chasing your kids around with nothing but a video camera. Like I take videos of the kids. I don't have a choice. I got 4 kids. I got to remember some of the early days, right? But you put it down, right? You enjoy that and then you put it away. Some people say they wish they'd taken more. I'm like, you're saying that 10 years later, you know, you got a memory.
Well, it's even like on a photo side of things. I mean, as I was clearing through, it was a whole exercise. I needed to make a lot of space. I'd used up all the memory on my phone, and I started deleting all these scenery photos as well. And some of them were quite nice. And I'm like, but then I thought about it. I'm like, some of the places are like downtown Toronto or when I was in New Orleans and things like that. I'm like, yes, very cool. But that same photo has been taken a million times over. So if I really want it, I can Google it because, like you said earlier, we have access to everything these days. And there it is. I don't need to store it as a photo. If I'm in the photo or my wife and I are in the photo, very different story. You can hold on to those because that shows you're there. It takes you together to that moment. But just generic photos of buildings, I'm not a photographer, so it's not like I'm building a portfolio here. It's a cool concept, but they don't hold up over time. And if I want it, like I said, I can go find it online, and I'll be just as happy.
Now, the one thing we should really get back to the origin of the podcast itself and the content. So Letterkenny is one of those shows that has become, you think like there's Corn of Gas, Letterkenny. There's a few that are so Canadian, but then they make it beyond, right? And when I grew up, it was SCTV, right? That was the whole thing of watching stuff like that and 3D movies, you know, like there's like just goofy things that you remember about that. Even so, this is a funny story. I had a friend who her apartment was John Candy's apartment on Roehampton Avenue it's right, Yonge and Eglinton. It's 100 Roehampton. And it was the one where they tossed the TVs off the balcony for the opener. Really? That apartment is 100 Roehampton Avenue. So and it was there were very local things, because of course we're Canadian. We didn't have much choice. You had Uncle Bobby, you had the Friendly Giant, and then you had whatever Canadian television you watched.
Yeah, House of Frightenstein was one of my
That's
favorites.
it. I know. And Billy Van is actually like
Billy
an
Van.
incredible creator, like as far as other things he did, just sort of an underwhelming presence, in the industry, but he did a lot behind the scenes. So you look at this idea of these like purely Canadian shows, and then now they go beyond. Like I can find it on Hulu. I live in the United States, and I can watch Letterkenny on there, and I see random things on Reddit. Like I think I told you guys I was searching for something for a space reference, and I wanted to get a picture of Roberta Bondar. And so what do I get? I'm scrolling through Reddit and I see this thing and it says, here's a picture of Roberta Bondar, and underneath it, was she sitting at the bar crushing old fashions when you took this photo? So a Letterkenny reference being written randomly on Reddit, you realize that these shows have a community and they have a reach that's farther. And then you choose so you've created a thematic podcast. So let's talk about the format of the podcast and what drew you to that style.
Well, like I kind of mentioned a bit in my intro, it's an after show. So just like other after shows, we present, we first of all, I talk about our weeks, and then I do a bit of a synopsis of the episode we're covering, and then we talk about it. We critique the episode. And what I like about it, again, we have these different voices and character, and characters. I mean, Tanya came in as she was the person who hated the show until she loved it. Victor's a curmudgeon still to this day. Matt's the squirrely one, and I'm supposed to be the parental figure to try to keep everything together there.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Often I lose control, but that's cool because our listeners love it. But yeah, so we take it often 20 to 25-minute show, and we basically make 2 hours of content about it, which is insane. But for the most part, people have really been responding to it.
Well, you really treat it like a morning show. Like I almost said morning zoo, but like really that idea of like a collaborative group of folks that talk about what happened the night before, like recapping the news. And that's like the opinion and the fun stories out of it are what makes that stuff fun. That's why that's why Humble and Fred did well, but better between the music than they did during the music. And eventually, when they started their podcast, which is actually one of the early sort of successful Canadian podcasts, because there wasn't much of a podcast industry at that time. It was Mark Maron and like, who were the other guys? Like but it was like seriously the early players in the game.
American Life, Prairie Home Companion, Vinyl Cafe, kind of the CBC and NPR podcasts. But then, you have your Mark Maron, your Kevin Smith's Modcast, Adam Carolla.
Adam Carolla, yeah.
Those are some of the early pioneers, yeah.
Well, and that was what was funny. Back early on, there was a guy that found and bought up the patent rights to the idea of distributing an audio over RSS. So basically a podcast.
Right.
And he went and bought up a bunch of patents and then sued all of like Adam Carolla Network, Mark Maron, Kevin Smith, all these folks to try and basically just see if he could get some cash out of it. Didn't pay out because they're like, you've got the concept, but you don't get the content. And it was an interesting sort of legal challenge that
he was
happened way early.
Claiming ownership over the standard, over the RSS.
Yeah. So because he was saying that I own, so I should get a piece of royalty of everything that creates revenue based on the technology that I own the patent for.
Yeah. That's like somebody trying to collect patent on HTML. Like, it's not going to happen. So
Right.
every single website that ever existed would have to pay you a royalty because you have a website. That's ridiculous. Yeah.
It's surprising how lucrative an industry it is, because they're like people like RIM, just sold off a bunch of their old patents to and this is like all this company that bought them does is buy up thousands of patents and then ultimately look for licensing deals out of it. And actually, I know a few people that do it legitimately, where they'll license their patent because like somebody says like this, there's no novel way to do what you've identified doing. other than the way you've identified, can we license your patent to do it? So it's a weird thing that happens behind the scenes, but yeah. So I love this idea that you went with this after show. Where did some of the concepts? So the poem.
So
This one I got.
Our very first episode, and the one we've actually marked as you can skip this, was our production meeting for the rest of the podcast. I recorded it because it's basically I brought everyone into the into a Zoom call, and I said, okay, we're gonna do this. Let's put some ideas out there. There are no bad ideas, and I mean, can't get too precious. You try something, and if it doesn't work, you have to be ready to let it go. But yeah, it's just evolved, right? It's been an evolution, and the limerick happened maybe halfway through, and I think it happened because one of the cold opens on Letterkenny started with limericks, and then I started writing them, for ours because it just made sense. A show called Letterkenny, you open it with a limerick, of course. And it's been great. And then Matt reading them and stuff. And now it's fun. Again, the community is amazing because there's there's so much prep that goes into it. And almost the very last thing I do before we start recording is write the limerick. And it's always a source of stress for me because
all the pressure's on.
There isn't a lot of stuff that you can rhyme with Letterkenny or degens or anyway. But now I've got some of our listeners have stepped in and they're writing them for us. So we're almost like crowdsourcing now a lot of our content, which is great. I love it.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, we talk about the community. I mean, that's I think I commented earlier, but that's been the biggest surprise of this whole thing. It started off as a fun game, fun thing to do every week, and then we did invite a few people early on. So every third or fourth episode, we might have a guest, and then at one point hit where we just had a lineup, and where at first it became sort of a fun little add-on, it now became a ongoing, absolute part of our show, where we're inviting our friends. I'm going to call them friends. We have made real relationships with many of these people onto the show to join in on the fun with us, because that's what this show. And if you're a fan of Letterkenny, the show is all about community, right? Everyone, a lot of different people coming together in a show that may have differences here and there, but at the end of the day, they all care about each other. They're all, this big sense of community, and all the people we met around the show who love it with us all bring that to the table as well. There are some amazing people out there. This show really does bring out a real interesting and awesome group of people that follow it and enjoy it. And yeah, we'll continue to do so. So we're very thankful for all that as well. And yeah, it's now one of our favorite elements. I know I ping every week. Oh, who's joining us this week? Oh, who's joining us? And if I don't know, I'm like, oh, yay, someone new, right? And if it's a repeat, we're like, I already know what to get ready for, and I get excited about it. So it's one of my favorite elements is, who's joining us.
Well, yeah, some of our Twitter too, it's like RIP notifications. You all have the most chatty, awesome DM group that goes on. RIP mentions.
I did go on Twitter at one point, and I am on it. And I think in one day, like, I think it was like only a couple of hours. And then I went and looked and I'm like, there's 400 messages. I'm like, how on earth does somebody, I'm like, this is a full-time job. I don't have time to go through this many messages. Oh my gosh.
And most of the conversation has nothing to do with Letterkenny. Like, there's a full active conversation right now happening about possums, it appears. So like, it goes all over the map, but it's all entertaining. It's all in good fun. And, sometimes it goes serious. Sometimes it just is banter, and it's, I can't keep up though.
The amazing thing about that is what a difference of so I can obviously choose my podcast as a different example of, I started mine through work, and I was like, hey, it's a selfish reason for me to just try it out as a platform. Like, it'll be fun. I got a bunch of nerd friends. I can have a nerd conversation but get the story behind the tech, get the story behind the person and why they did something. I've always been enticed by the storytelling aspect. And then at one point they said, like, I probably still have the email somewhere saying, it doesn't look like it's actually leading to anything in pipeline revenue. So let's just not spend time on this. I'm like, all right. So I just, I did a couple more, and then I was like, all right, I'll just let it go. And all of a sudden, like 3-4 months later, I looked on iTunes. For some reason I was searching something. I'm like, oh, I forgot. I've probably got this podcast up there. I should check to see what the last episode was.
Mhm.
And I look and there was comments and they said like, I love the conversational style of the show or something like that. And I was like, oh man, I got to do it again. I got to keep it going because
Mhm.
there's someone listening. There's somebody out there that's going like refreshing their thing going, where's the next episode? I'm like, all right. And I kind of committed to it. And that interaction was what made it like, it gave me a reason to do it. And now, obviously I'm a couple of hundred further in and it's growing. But if I had a DM group, it would be me and maybe my wife. Like it's no one gives a crap about this podcast to talk about it on a real-time basis, but the community side of what you do, like I said, really harkens back to that message board, super active, collegial thing. And like you said, Matt, it's, you could talk about anything. I love watching the random, like these sort of non sequitur things just show up. And all of a sudden there's a stream of like, what's the right way to shave a possum's belly before you take it for its operation, whatever, like bizarre thing. And then there's somebody that's got a real like, oh yeah, I had to do this last year.
All walks of life are represented.
I always knew we had to form a community for the podcast to grow, right? Like without a community, it'll just be us yelling into the void and maybe one or two people might listen. But the interesting thing too is the way the tool used for the community. I mean, Twitter DM isn't exactly a community tool. It's, it's one-on-one, maybe a few on a few chat function at best. We have 75 people. We've maxed out our DM group. We can't have any more. We'd have to kick somebody off in order to add somebody on. And so there's always been like, oh, maybe we should move this to a Discord or something like that. But we tried that and it failed. People don't want like the immediacy of Twitter, because it's already on an app on your phone and you're getting your notifications right away. For some reason that lends to the the discussion, because now you don't have to log on to an app to talk to post something. It's Twitter. You have it with you all the time. It's almost like an ongoing conversation wherever you go, and you just go on and answer whatever the latest question was, and you don't have to worry about what thread you were.
So I don't have to read all that?
No, you really don't. Many don't. So you don't have to feel daunted about that, right?
I'm a little ADD going, okay, 400. Okay, let's take this 1 hour at a time.
But it's
you accidentally tap it twice and it goes to the bottom. You're like, I missed a lot of conversations. I got to scroll back up and find my start point.
Do and that's great. Whatever. Like there are those. I mean, I try to, because it's always good to know what's going on in that community. But if I log on and there's like 400 messages, and then a lot of it's like deep cuts on Star Wars lore or some shit like that, which I'm not really interested in, I'll just skip it. It's no problem. They're having fun with each other. No one's fighting. No one's misbehaving. So we just move on. But it's funny. We tried. We hit a critical mass on Twitter DM. So I'm like, maybe we should move it to Discord. No one wants to.
Can you call the Twitter people and ask them for more?
Yeah. Just exactly. Forget an edit button. Just give me a DM. Larger DM groups, like that true community type of aspect.
But it makes you wonder too, like if ever they decided to add like maybe a threading function in your DM or whatever, would that be better or not? Like, is there something about the restrictive nature of a DM group that makes it work for
it more entertaining?
Maybe, I don't know, because it's just weird.
Well, and I think it's platform of immediacy, right? Twitter for this type of interaction is like bike theft. It's a crime of opportunity, right? You walk by, you see an undone chain hanging over a bike frame. You get on the goddamn bike and you ride like you stole it. Yeah. So when you think of Twitter, it's like I'm there doing other things. So I just tap that tab and I'm on there versus going to Discord. Now, if you're a developer or a gamer, and the reason why Discord's super popular, my hypothesis of why it's super popular with developers is because a large community of developers are also gamers, and Discord is a place. So they at night are on Discord.
Yeah.
So they love, like, why not just leave it running all day long? And next thing you know, there's developer communities.
We have a 15-year-old son, and he's got 3 monitors, and one of his monitors is always on Discord. That's the way he communicates with his friends. It's, it's a different mindset for, I say younger people, but I I am on Discord, but I don't log on very often.
I'm already like, this is the funny thing. Every once in a while, like, if I talk about my age with people that I didn't grow up with, I don't care. When I talk about you, I'm like, God damn it, now I remember everything. We're actually old. This sucks. But it is amazing to think of that. And it used to at one point be, I want you to get real friends, right? And I remembered even my oldest son, he's 19, and this idea that getting told, like, I wish you would, like, go out and find real friends. And I said, well, if you bring 4 of his friends together, they're going to bring their laptops with them and sit in the room on Skype and game anyways. So why not let them do it wherever they are? And it became a practice of doing it. And that's why I think, like, podcasting as a pattern of consumption is such a popular place now, because people can get it on demand. They can turn it on or off. They can download what they want. They can binge it. They can listen in the car. And I've been told over and over again, like, well, going long form will bury your podcast listenership, because they said at 20 minutes, people have their attention goes. I'm like, well, that's if you're, like, pitching or doing something. Like, I'm having a conversation.
Yeah.
You can just get in or out whenever you want. And look, I'm like, I used to tell people, do you read books? Yeah. Do you read it from end to end? No. Well, how do you do that? How can you possibly put it down at chapter 2? You're like, sorry, kids, you got to eat. Too bad. I'm in chapter 4, right? I got to keep going. You put it down. Your brain has the capability. And I've found that it's actually been better, because the freedom of having no gap of, like, I've got to hit this time frame. It's I like that freedom.
I think even early on, some of my favorite comments from listeners were always around, listening to your show is like hanging out with a bunch of our friends. And like, they just wanted to be, and they felt like they knew us, and they felt like they could see themselves sitting and hanging out and having the same conversation, which is probably part of why we invited them in anyways, and said, well, hey, come join us. And it's just, and that's part of where I think a lot of it's grown from. People just feel part of our discussions.
Yeah, the campfire sort of aspect of it really, really does feel just, like a bunch of friends hanging around a table. And you, even though you're physically separated, you really do sense that you're, like, sitting across from each other. You have the ability, especially over time, to, like, get the cues of who's going to jump in. And, Zoom is the only thing that Zoom is a bit of a drag. And I don't mean to trash Zoom just because I'm using SignalWire, but the reason why I actually dig this platform that I use is because it does multiplex audio. So if all 4 of us, like all 3 cameras, started chatting at the same time, it all goes through.
Oh, really?
And it's the weird thing, though, is Zoom has trained us like idiots to be like a 1920s telephone system, where as like one signal goes through, okay, pull that cable, go to the next one. As soon as you hear somebody talking, we all stop.
Yeah.
Right. And then go, sorry, no, you got, it's like
Wayne and McMurray.
Yeah. So the advantage with this is that, and Zoom's getting better, I think, where they allow more crosstalk now, but it used to be really bad. We'd have, like, company meetings and people say, like, we're going to welcome all the new recruits, right? You got a bunch of new hires. Okay, everybody come off mute and let's give them a round of applause. And all I hear is, because there's 400 people, but only one of them gets the audio.
One of our early,
that's awesome.
One of the early bright ideas we had from our production meeting was Victor is a really good guitarist, and we thought, oh, he could play a little guitar in the background while we're talking about something. I forget what it was, and we tried it, and of course Zoom doesn't allow that. It gates, like, if we're talking, you can't hear Victor playing, and if he's playing, we. So pretty sure that one didn't last very long.
Yeah, the only thing that I wish we had as far as this, like for your show, is that idea that you could literally, everything should be commercially viable because you got such a fantastic group of people and a beautiful way of really being together, and to actually see you folks sitting in a room, and like I just wish you could get paid to do that, because you do a great job of it, right? It's one day exactly.
Thank you.
People,
well,
someone says that
can pay us a little bit more, and we'll do it.
Well, talk about an avid community. I'm, as the co-owner of Diabolical Coffee, you all contribute a lot to my success. I've actually got quite a few folks that are coming through the produce stand that are buyers, and it's cool. That's why I love.
I don't mean to sound a surprise. Really, it's working. No,
commercial showing any.
Your commercial's the best, yeah. But so this is the funny thing. People always wonder about sponsorships, and look, I've got sponsors, and I feel bad having them sometimes because the thing, like, no one's gonna buy stuff because they listen to my goofy show, right? But in the end, it actually does create awareness, and so if the psychology of advertising, it's not about, I heard about a thing, quick, pause it, let me go buy that thing.
Yeah.
But your community is very strong, and they do support, brands that you mentioned and stuff like that, which is cool. And I see you got a couple of TPS hats there, which are very cool. So
I love it. My favorite hat.
Yeah,
it's fun to support, and trust me, if I made more money, you'd make more money. That's the only problem. Your support is only limited by my revenue.
That's all good. No, we appreciate all the support you've given us, Eric. I mean, we're buds from before, but at the same time, it's been great to have you on, and hopefully we continue as Shoresy starts up. I don't know how big a story that is down there, but up here we can't wait.
That's going to be wild.
Yeah. So
now, here's the interesting thing, and I think you and I may have talked about this early on at one point. I said, like, you've got a team, right? You've got a method, you've got a knack, you've got all the right things, in kind of the way that a salesperson can go from like working for, podunk widgets, and then they can go and work for Wiffle Waffle widgets, and or even better, they can switch and they can sell cars or real estate. If you have the practice and the method, you can apply it to any industry. Right. And so I've always listened to you as a group, as individuals, and think like, this is bigger than Letterkenny. Like, you have much more to bring, and I do hope that you kind of go and that you can find another thing that you can do, because as a group, you just keep grinding it out. Like, as a guy that's been grinding for a long time, I don't know that it's been worth anything more than having the fun of it.
Right.
But I'm seeing other benefits that are coming now, and you are all too good to stop.
Right.
Because Letterkenny stopped.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Kind.
I mean, in a year and a half, or almost 2 years, it'll be 2 years in July. So maybe a year and a half. We've missed 1 week, 2 weeks. I mean, I've missed more time at my actual paying job than.
Yeah. It's so true. And the other hilarious thing is, if we ever, we've got such a defined schedule, if we shift things around, which is often my fault, we get yelled at by people saying like, oh, so I guess there's nothing to listen to the Friday morning, right? Like they get upset, and I say upset, but it's become a very comical thing. And Al gives them lots of notice, or as much as he can, to say, hey, govern yourselves accordingly. We're moving things around this week.
there is always that kind of reluctance, because without Letterkenny, I mean, it's the produce stand. We could talk about other things. Sorry, there's an echo there. I don't know if you're getting it or not. But.
All clear here, luckily. So
okay, cool. It's very distracting. Anyway, it's called the produce stand. So really, I mean, it's kind of only tangentially tied to Letterkenny. So we could just continue doing it on other topics. The question, the fear for me anyway, because we have our feed, we don't want our feed to go stale. But we want to make sure whatever we pick won't alienate too many of our regular listeners to go away. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
I mean, Shoresy's a good bet because it's a spin-off from Letterkenny, and there's a lot of excitement happening there. So hopefully when that happens, and then in short time, season 11 will launch. So maybe we have another runway of hopefully 3 or 4 months that we can continue doing this. But yeah, then the real work's going to start. What do we do next? Like, what are the ideas? Like, we need to get really creative with it for sure.
Well, if you think of like, the TPS report, right? Like you almost as a joke of the Office Space
Yeah.
thing, right? You could carry that through, and whether it's commentary on anything. The tough part, which is weird, and because I'm an older fella, I've got a reputation to preserve. And I've got a couple of nephews who are fantastic podcasters. The first thing they did was they got into like politics. I'm like, dude, I can't touch it because you want to be careful that you don't ultimately alienate a big segment of your audience. So I'm very generic. I don't talk about politics or religion or anything. And maybe it's a Canadian thing too, that we just steer clear of that stuff. But
we talked about, doing some movie reviews or whatever. I had a notion that maybe we can review pilots like during pilot season, and then apply our kind of rating system, and then see, what shows will last. But I mean, even that's different now because there's no such thing as a network floating a pilot anymore.
Yeah.
And then maybe they'll pick it up. Now it's like a whole season will get dropped.
Yeah.
And then if they like it, you'll continue, right? So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see for sure. It's a good problem to have now. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's it. It's really, and maybe you could go to the community in a way and kind of say like, hey, we're going to test out an episode or test out a concept, and it could be whether it's an internet show or like something that you pick, and like switch up the content. But and breaking it down, look, I mean, like think movies, Matt, look at your background, right? That idea where you see something and you're like, I totally get it. Like a cold open. What the hell's a cold open, right? Just explain to people, like break down the format of a show. And my favorite thing, although you mentioned the right thing, though, forget about the pilot, but even just season 1, episode 1, just call it TPS E1, the best of every show is episode 1. Always goes downhill after that. Like there's one of my favorite shows was Eastbound and Down. Hilarious show.
Yes.
But the moment that I watched the first one, I was like, I don't know if I want to watch the second one because that was so goddamn funny.
Right.
And so like, it's like Lost. Like if you watch Lost beyond the first few shows, shit goes sideways fast, right? Like, and that's what they ended up with, all these bad threads because they started to write for the audience, not for the story. That's why I love like The Wire. They're like, we're done. We wrote the end when we wrote the first episode, and we're just going to film in towards it. So, like picking stuff like, like a first episode of something and saying like, why did it work and where did it break down? The Jump the Shark episode 2, like that idea of, oh boy, let's talk about why this one broke down.
That when aliens visited, that's when they lost it there. Yeah.
yeah. Well, even it's like I look at YouTubers now, and I sort of, I've got young kids as well as older kids, and so I watch a lot of these goofy YouTube, creator shows, and they're like, Vlad and Nikki, and and like little Diana, and you'd see these ones. They're multi-millionaires doing these YouTube enterprises. And then my wife and I were joking because you see a bunch of them that have like 2 kids, and they'll have like a 5-year run of content, and all of a sudden there's a baby, and you're like, oh, that's like the kid that showed up on Family Ties. You're like, they just added a new character, like, and it's gonna go south now.
Yeah.
But do what you do. You're really good at it. And for
Thank
people
you.
that don't already subscribe, go check it out. It's the Produce Stand. You can find it online. And I hope to see you all on YouTube, because I think as far as like production capability, you've got the technical chops to deliver it, and I think it'd be fun. Like, I'm living vicariously through your capabilities because I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm just hammering ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that. You got some cool ass gear there that I wish I could use, but
It's getting there. It's getting there. Yeah.
We just got to give Victor a better mic.
yeah, we got to get
He has
Yeah,
a
Victor's
better
the only one. Like, he's always like every time I see him, he's like in a train station in Kapuskasing, or like he's always like dialing in from somewhere remote. You know, it always seems like he's struggling
Riding
for
a
remote.
unicorn.
Yeah, it's by design. Like Tanya was saying, he has a better mic. He just refuses to use it. It's a little frustrating, but
That is
I think it
hilarious.
adds to his kind of curmudgeon nature. I think people like that about him. I don't know.
He is well, and that's the diversity of voices is really neat, which gives people a chance to do it. But now the fun part is, like, in 4 years, when do you all break up as a team? Be like, oh, now you're competing against each other, right? So there you go. For folks that do want to find you, Al, give them all the socials. Where do we track down the produce stand and see what's next?
I try to make it as easy as possible. It's at Produce Stand Pod everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, even TikTok, at Produce Stand Pod. And join, if you want to join our DM group, it would have to mean that we'd have to kick somebody out. So
this is a special members only club.
but you can still, we still try to have as much fun as we can on Twitter. And we every once in a while we do our Ag Hall socials. So not next week, but the following week will be one of our Ag Hall socials, and that's when we invite any of our listeners to join us on a Zoom call. And this one's extra special because it's our 100th episode. And what we've got planned is we've asked our listeners to come with clips of their favorite moments of the previous 99 episodes. And we have no idea what's going to be played. So they're going to play them and we're going to react to them. And it's going to be hijinks are going to ensue, I hope. So
that is awesome. There you go. TPS Reacts. That's your new YouTube channel. Get on it. I want to see you all become successful, further success, right? You're already successful in that you've really done a great thing. So it's great to see. And just the fact that we can do this and fit it into our day, and it's fun. It's just fun. That's success in my mind, right? I love doing this stuff. So, all right, crew. And for all the folks that do want to check it out, of course, like I said, check out the podcast. And I was lucky enough; I was a guest on a couple of them. You can hunt it down and check out Letterkenny too. It's a wicked cool show. It's super funny. So there you go, pitter patter. Let's get at her.